Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Hello, friends. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your practice. That's what we're here for. And we are reading Chapter 2 of the Lankavatara Sutra, a translation by Mr. Suzuki, who seems to be bound for whatever reason to religious language biases, and so trying to avoid those pitfalls. And see, even through his translation, certainly we can glean the meaning of this sutra. So we're now in the midst of conversation between Mahamati, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, and the emancipated one, Shakyamuni, right? Again, Mahamati, there are 7 kinds of first principle, or highest reality, Paramartha. The world of thought, the Sita Gokara. The world of knowledge, Jnana. The world of super knowledge, Prajna, right? We know about the Prajna Paramita and the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras and those. The world of dualistic views, the world beyond dualistic views, and the world beyond the Bodhisattva stages, and a world where the Tathagata attains his self-realization. Now that's a bit of language that, again, strictly speaking, is incorrect. The Tathagata doesn't seek his enlightenment. Tathagata is enlightenment. So more appropriately, I think what the translation is trying to say here is that this is the state, the state of mind of prajna that is the very subject of our samsaric self-realization. But again, without the ninth consciousness, it's not a comfortable fit. So I can see why. I don't know what the original text says, but you can capture that missing part just in the way this is translated. Anyway, to continue. Mahamati, this is the self-nature, the first principle, the essence, which constitutes the being of the Tathagatas. And here it includes arhats, fully enlightened ones of the past, present, and future, whereby perfecting things of this world and of a world beyond this, they, by means of a noble eye of transcendental wisdom, enter into various phases of existence, individual and general, and establish them. So, another word salad, right? This seems to be, again, the Lankavatara struggles with this throughout the text, so might as well get used to it. This is a state of knowing, again, trying to describe what this awakening is like. And so this is dissected into the distinguishing demarcation points of that shift from the constant discernment of things to categorizing them into various phases of existence, a deeper understanding. But all of this linguistic contortion and gymnastics is simply because they're stuck in this ultimate, what they consider to be, at that time, alaya consciousness, this storehouse of karma. And so all of this language, verbiage, and everything is all about how enlightenment is a proper identification, which it isn't, of these different states of being. Well, that's the expedient means. That's certainly what these sutras are doing, is teaching these various mental conceptual realities, right? But this is not Tathagata. This is not Buddha. This is an attempt to squeeze it into our discerning consciousnesses. And it's not working out really well. So they're tripping all over themselves. But let's go on. And what is thus established by them is not to be confused with the erroneous teachings generally held by the philosophers. Yeah, but you're really struggling to make that dividing line palpable, unfortunately. The idea of the noble eye of transcendental wisdom is a nice poetic blurb of language, trying again to shoehorn this separation from the 8 consciousnesses, specifically the alaya, to indicate a knowledge, a mind, a mental eye that can see beyond it. Okay, they're knocking at the door, aren't they? Mahamati, what are these erroneous teachings accepted generally by the philosophers? Their error lies in this, that they do not recognize an objective world to be of mind itself, which is erroneously discriminated, and not understanding the nature of the Vijnanas, which are also no more than manifestations of mind. Like simple-minded ones that they are, they cherish the dualism of being and non-being, where there is but one self-nature and one first principle. This is so problematic. See, this is because they're stuck again in the alaya. They're seeing, labeling it right there in language. This idea of mind only. It's not altogether wrong, but again, he's labeling it as one self-nature. So they're trying to wrap up the self-nature in the mind only. But Buddha, Buddha-ness, Tathagata, has no self-nature. Nothing has a self-nature. So how can they invoke this primary beginning fundamental teaching of Buddhism of self-nature is an illusion, and then say that the way to perceive that illusion is to use the one special self-nature of the mind? Right? And then all the consciousnesses are derived from the mind, so they're not real. They don't have a self-nature. But somehow the mind does. The mind, as a reminder, because we're Lotus Sutra Buddhists, we understand that the mind is a facility of observation that is samsaric. Period. End of story. End of that story. End of the story of manifesting moment to moment. The mind is one of those things, phenomena, that is manifested moment to moment. So what is Buddha-ness? Buddha-ness is in that singular moment a penetration beyond mind and samsara and all of this, because these are manifestations, a piercing observation, because that's what the mind is capable of doing, that this entire process of life is visible, experienceable by the tremendous variety and plethora of sparks. It's evidence of manifesting from potential. That the very nature of all phenomena is not different. It's not all those sparks are not individual. They're simply expressions of everything that can be expressed. Isn't that amazing? It's not about individuating the expressive sparks evidence of the process of life. It's to see and witness that process playing out moment to moment throughout time, space, a process which is not bound by that time and space. That is, time and space is another phenomena created by this process that we're witnessing and experiencing. This is to experience the process. This is to be in Buddha-ness, unattached from what the process produces. Ourselves as well. And you might ask, well, how can we be the observer and be in it at the same time? Great question. This is because we have a ninth consciousness built into the instantiations of this process of life that gives us a window, an eye, a gohonzon, to be within the process without being enmired, entangled in it. A viewer, Buddha-ness. That Tathagata in beginningless time, that Buddha-ness in time with no beginning, doesn't have a mind. It doesn't have an observer. It doesn't have an experiencer. It is without self-nature. Buddha is without self-nature. Tathagata is without self-nature. In other words, it is not a phenomena. Tathagata is an initial formation energy. It takes place in that place, in that time without time, in that place without place. It is from the quiescent energy, the work, not even the work. It is the fundament from which all potential realizes or expresses. So it's not form. It's not formation. Is it the quiescent energy? Is it the potential within the quiescent energy to be expressed, but no work happening yet? So there's no karma. You see, Buddha-ness, whether you experience it or not, or I experience it or not, has no karma. There is no action being taken. There is only quiescence. So this is why you read words in several sutras like quietude and calming, right? The great concentration and insight, or the great concentration and calming discourse of Tendai. The calming isn't get a hold of yourself and breathe slowly and be calm. That's not the calmness they're talking about. They're talking about, if you know chemistry at all, is it Rankine scale? Or 0 Kelvin, where the temperature is so cold in the universe that atoms cease to move? It's before that, because atoms are phenomena, cold is phenomena, universe is phenomena. So at some point, without time, there is the potential, and being in that state of quiescence, there's nothing, there's no action, there's no work being done, so there's no karma. So therefore, there's no possibility of attachment, because there's nothing to attach to, and there's no attacher or perceiver. This state of Buddhahood is a label on our samsaric mind that provides for us a facility to perceive the perceiver, self, and transcend that perceiver as just another phenomena of the process. It's a displacement. It's a paradigm shift. It's an insight, a calmity, a quietude that is not this world, not this universe, but the source, the background, the fundament from which. See, once you include that step, and you call it a consciousness, you're transcending all the other 8. Because all the other 8, including the karmic consciousness, the 8th consciousness, the alaya consciousness, which the Tathagata or the Lankavatara is obsessed with, once you slip underneath that, that's when your mind can perceive a mind that is instantiated, a mind that is samsaric, which is what they're wrestling with here, a mind of the 8th consciousness, the 8 of them altogether. If you can shift your mind, train your mind to dump all of that as observation rather than within it. Like my analogy about being in the rapids. If you could sense everything that's going on in the rapids in your little canoe or kayak without being in the rapids, just being an observer of the process, then you're no longer a part of it. You're just witnessing it. And by witnessing it, in the space of witnessing it, time space, this is where your compassion, look at the rapids. Look at what that person is feeling and experiencing, and the panic, the fear, the exaltation, the adrenaline, all of it. You could be so calm. You could have all of that without the tremendous upheavals of your attachments. You could stand outside of it, stand mentally outside of it, outside the mind of phenomenal experience, and have the mind of detachment. This is why if you look at my videos and my charts on the 9 consciousnesses, the 9th doesn't just sit beneath the 8th as though it's a progression, right? Because we use numbers. This is how we communicate with language. And we have the sight consciousness and the oral consciousness and the this, all the way down to the alaya, which we perceive with our minds to be the collection, the massive collection of tendencies and conditions that result in a you and I. And with that insight, we understand that you and I are an assemblage of our experiences, sight, sound, feeling, taste, blah, 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 blah. But when we penetrate our mind, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, to experience the all fundamental process that begets all of this manifestation, all of these tendencies and conditions actually manifesting, we stand outside of it. My drawings will show you, and I'll put that up in the video again, that the 9th consciousness, the Amala consciousness, the Buddha-ness that we experience only in this life, because there's nothing to experience it outside of this life, completely surrounds the other 8 consciousnesses. And what I mean by that is that we don't lose anything. We simply embrace all of it as what it is, sparks, manifestations that are simply the activity of life, beingness. But in perceiving all of the 8 that way, we detach ourselves emotionally. We don't invest selfhood into being. There is no self-nature in Buddha-ness, in Tathagata. So there's nothing stressing. There's nothing anxious. There's only compassion. Come observe this life from this perspective. We slip out of the adherence and conditions of being, and we become observers of being. That's Tathagata. So they're not there yet. It's obvious in the language, translation or no, that they're stuck in the materialness, right? Because the alaya is energy being material, mass. It's instantiation. So in order to be detached, we cannot be involved in the instantiation. We must mentally distance ourselves from the process in order to truly observe the process. We can't be in it. If we're in it and observing it, then we're just trying to manipulate it with our ego. It's tough to grasp. And this is why we don't use words when we chant. We use concepts that we are emulating, this egolessness. And we train our mind to open that door, that escape hatch from samsaric attachment, right, to Tathagata detachment, observation. We don't annihilate anything. Again, Mahamati, my teaching consists in the cessation of sufferings arising from the discrimination of the triple world, in the cessation of ignorance, desire, deed, and causality, and in the recognition that an objective world, like a vision, is a manifestation of mind itself. That last part is the sticky one. Everything was perfect until that last statement. So, how do we make that last statement work for us? And just to repeat it, the manifestation of mind itself. If you add the clarity of another level of consciousness that is detached, which is what he's describing here, understanding that the mind itself is a construction, a manifestation. Recognition that an objective world, so that's correct, you're seeing the world objectively, like a vision. That starts being samsaric, but okay, we can work with that, is the manifestation of mind itself. Well, you just proved what I was saying earlier. The mind then is part of the phenomenal universe. And that mind, doing its phenomenal thing as an ego, is observing all of the activity. And that is a stage, you would say, of awakening, of enlightenment. But it doesn't separate you ultimately from an ego. And this is the problem with an arhat and hinayana and agama. And here it is still showing itself in the Lankavatara. Do you understand? If I understand all the teachings of Buddhism, and I intellectually understand that I'm just a moment-to-moment existence, and that all of the things or thingness around me are just as momentary and impermanent as I am, and that I'm just swimming through time with all of this stuff manifesting around me, I've reached a level of detachment from stuff. I don't care. I'm not particularly emotionally bound by anything. But you could argue that that makes you kind of a dead human. Because you can't love. Because you don't own anything anymore. A loss of something doesn't affect you. Because everything is without significance, without identification. My identification, who I think I am, isn't any longer relying on my perceptions or how I'm perceived by others, what I have or don't have. Right? This is the path of quasi-nihilism or hermitage, right? Isolation. But we know that that's not the goal of Buddhism. We know that that's not the ultimate experience of enlightenment, of awakening. It's supposed to be joyful. It's supposed to be dedicated interaction with others. So how do we resolve this duality? Obviously, we haven't escaped it yet. So it's an incomplete awakening, an incomplete enlightenment. It certainly isn't Tathagata. And the Lankavatara, purposefully or not purposefully, is enumerating and dissecting this very problematic. And we read later in Mahayana and certainly in the Lotus Sutra, that it is our bodhisattva activity itself that provides for perfect and complete enlightenment. Because in helping others, to use the language we all know, is a form of selflessness. So we can actually manifest in samsara through our dedicated actions, because our actions will respond to what? What causes you to do compassionate things for others? A concern? A desire for others to experience their life better? You have to pay attention here, because those acts invested completely in the benefits of others has, like a comet, a tail behind it. A tail of self-action that is not directed at the self, and yet producing a satiating, beneficial trail of actions in our samsaric life. We then can feel satisfaction or joy from that, a sense of completeness from that. But our actions weren't directed at getting the sense of completeness. That sense of completeness emerges from our karmic actions toward others. And so what's happening karmically in the alaya consciousness is because our ninth consciousness of this unself-attached activity, fully developed for other, paradoxically minimizes our actions for self. We diminish our attachments through the very act of assisting others to a better life. So assisting others to a better life by means of enlightenment has to be the most selfless act, using the parlance of samsara, yes? So by helping others to attain their enlightenment, all of the karmic freight train that is producing our samsaric identity is minimized and diminished, which is why we move toward a released, emancipated state. It is in the very act in samsara of assisting others that our life becomes emancipated and our visual experience of life becomes freer, more closer to the fundament of the process, Buddha-ness. It is that very samsaric mechanism that provides for us the liberation we seek. And once again, we understand that it is only within this samsaric life that we can truly experience Buddha-ness. And when we die, that goes extinct. It's gone. Arises, abides, ceases. So it won't be a concern then. It can't be. there won't be a mind to be concerned of it. So do you see why the Lankavatara is so stuck in this eighth consciousness, trying to find verbiage to work with? Once you add the ninth consciousness, then there's this great hatch, escape hatch. There's this great door that opens that is actually unconditioned. And this is constantly what we read about when Shakyamuni talks about Buddhahood. It's unconditioned. It has no self-nature. The Dharma is empty. Mahamati. There are some Brahmins and Shramanas who assume something out of nothing, saying that there exists a substance which is bound up in causation and abides in time, and that the skandhas, dhatus, and ayatanas have their genesis and continuation in causation, and after thus existing, pass away. There are those, Mahamati, who hold a destructive and nihilistic view concerning such subjects as continuation, activity, rising, breaking up, existence, nirvana, the path, karma, fruition, the truth. Why? Because they have not attained an intuitive understanding of the truth, because they have no fundamental insight of things. Mahamati, it is like a jar broken in pieces, which is unable to function as a jar. Again, it is like a burnt seed, which is incapable of sprouting. Even so, Mahamati, their skandhas, dhatus, and ayatanas, which they regard as subject to changes, are really incapable of uninterrupted transformation because their views do not originate from the perception of an objective world as a manifestation of mind itself, which is erroneously discriminated. Welcome to the salad bar, folks. What a bunch of words. I really wish I could read the ancient languages. So, he's talking about teachers. And he's talking about this idea that everything is bound up by cause. And we'd have to do a deeper dive, I think, and he probably will, into the nature of cause. What is cause? I think that word becomes a trap in the idea of the eight consciousnesses, because again, the fundament that they keep coming back to at this stage is this karmic freight train. So if there's action that's been done to energy, then the idea is that there's a doer of that cause, a doer of that work, of that, what's the other word I use? Action. And that causes things to happen. The causation verbiage, and it may be an English or linguistic convention that's getting in the way. But if you think about causation as, I would argue, most physicists, chemists, scientists would, it's just a word indicating some tendency and form of energy doing what it does. That boiling water causes it to evaporate, but that's not because there's an entity willfully causing that action. It's an action that's a product of the nature of the tendencies and conditions of the component things, energies. That there's no one driving the energy. The energy is driving itself. So what's causal there? What's causal there is a word defining just reactions and relationships. So you kind of have to unglue yourself from the idea of a causer or a willful causation. The process is just the process. It happens. Just because we're conscious or witnesses of it happening does not imbue the activity with a persona. This is one of the critical teachings of Buddhism, and language can trip us up about that. The world as a manifestation of mind itself, which is erroneously discriminated, which could be a shorthand for what I just said. If you understand it thusly, that the manifestations of mind are not a mind that creates those things. See, this is where this gets slippery. The mind constructs from all of the Legos of life something, but the mind doesn't make the Legos. The mind just perceives the Legos, identifies with the Legos, and makes them permanent to construct an idea of self. But the mind does not construct the world. It constructs the world vis-a-vis the self. Like the fountain analogy. You can go look that video up on this channel. Right? 10 people see a fountain. Then they're interviewed later, and each one has a slightly different or entirely different experience, perception of that fountain, if they even saw it to begin with. Right? That doesn't change the fountain. It's the personal experience of the fountain that's created and constructed, not the manifestation of the fountain itself. So this is slippery here in the Lankavatara, yeah? The objective world as a manifestation of mind itself, which is erroneously discriminated, I would say, is the erroneous discrimination that the version of the fountain you saw or didn't see is the fountain. That's where the problem is. That's the making permanent. That's the identifying. That's the objective, subjective, right? Because that fountain is just your fountain at that time. Later on, you may remember it completely differently. Did the fountain change? You changed. Identifying this idea of the mind at work is very important. And I fear this language, it's hunting around. That's why it sounds like a salad, because it doesn't resolve itself. It just has all these words it throws at you, and you're supposed to divine an answer. Let's continue. If again, Mahamati, something comes out of nothing, and there is the rise of the Vijnanas by reason of a combination of the three effect-producing causes, we can say the same of the non-existing thing, that a tortoise would grow hair and sands produce oil. Well, they do. As this is impossible, this proposition does not avail. It ends in affirming nothing. And Mahamati, it follows that deed, work, and cause of each they speak will be of no use, and so also with their reference to being and not being. Mahamadi, when they argue that there is a combination of the three effect-producing causes, they do this by the principle of cause and effect, which is to say, by the principle that something comes out of nothing and not of nothing. And thus, there are such things as past, present, and future, and being and non-being. As long as they remain on their philosophical ground, their demonstration will be by means of their logic and textbooks for the memory of erroneous intellection, which will ever cling to them. Thus, Mahamadi's simple-minded ones, poisoned by an erroneous view, declare the incorrect way of thinking taught by the ignorant to be the one presented by the all-knowing one. Wow. There's a footnote here. Let's see what he says. The reasoning here may be a little difficult to follow. The general idea, let's hear what Suzuki says, maintained by the Lankavatara, is that as long as a world of relativity is asserted, then there is an ever-recurring chain of causation which cannot be denied in any circumstance. In this case, we cannot talk of anything coming to an end or cessation. The fault with the philosophers is that they have no fundamental intuition into the essential nature of an objective world, a world of particulars, which is really the projection of mind by reason of memory or habit energy accumulated since beginningless time. He likes that term. When this thought is thoroughly grasped, the philosopher's point of view may also hold good as far as it goes. As they lack, however, the fundamental intuition, all the logical superstructure they build is essentially an error. Well, he just substituted one word salad for another, didn't he? All right. What we're talking about here, as I hope I've distinguished, is really the difference between operating within the physical universe and allowing ourselves to perceive of the physical universe as the product of a process, and that viewing that the potential of that process in our mental facility is itself an emancipation from the products of the process. That's maybe I just made coleslaw instead of a salad. Oh, yeah, how to talk about this, yeah. Let's go on and see if we don't get better opportunities for insights into this. But one can certainly be sympathetic to the struggle in this sutra with identification, really. Sramanas who, recognizing that the external world, which is of mind itself, is seen as such owing to the discrimination and false intellection practiced since beginningless time, know that the world has no self-nature and has never been born. It is like a cloud, a ring produced by a firebrand, the castle of the Gandharvas, a vision, a mirage, the moon as reflected in the ocean, and a dream. That mind in itself has nothing to do with discrimination and causation, discourses of imagination, and terms of qualification, the Lakshana, that body, property, and abode are objectifications of the Alaya Vijnana, which is in itself above the dualism of subject and object, that the state of imagelessness, which is in compliance with the awakening of mind itself, is not affected by such changes as arising, abiding, and destruction. And this particular clause here is not contained in all of the translations. So where it came about exactly and how, or we don't know. But there it is again, this adherence to the alaya vijnana. The alaya being the repository of karma, the vijnana is a mental awareness or expression, more accurately, of that karmic energy. The mind as manifestation itself. So it's in the language here, even though I don't think it's trying to mean that, but it's very easy to see that the mind also is a construct, just as everything else is. The problem here, earlier stated, is that everything is unborn, or like a cloud, has no self-nature. It's a mirage, or a moon in the ocean. I would say that's a misinterpretation. Because as I keep repeating, the fact of the matter is, all of these sparks, all of these manifestations of potential do in fact exist. Whew, thank you, Sylvain. Thank you. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I had to see everything around me as just a cloud. No, it's an actual, the shift here is that this particular thing that you're touching, holding, seeing is in process of instantiation, one moment after another. That it doesn't have a permanence. It's not static. It is in a process of abiding its tendencies and conditions, however put together. That's a little different than what this implies. The way this is written, you could see why people would resort to nihilism. Well, nothing's real, therefore nothing really exists, therefore I'm just watching a film of my own making. If you could say that, then you're kind of lost in your identity. And that's not what Buddhism's trying to do. Buddhism is trying to get you to see more deeply into the fundamental nature of everything, just as your mind is a thing and you are a thing. But it is that attachment, that process of ownership, that anxiety about having and not having. That's what we're trying to sift out of this samsaric experience. That make sense? The Bodhisattvas Mahasattvas, Mahamati, will before long attain to the understanding that Nirvana and Samsara are one. And that's an important statement. That your emancipation from the stresses and anxieties of hanging on to your identification process and enlightenment are not separate things. They're perceptive shift. One perception, one identification process keeps you hooked in and causes you stress and anxiety. Once everything flows, nothing changes but your perception, and you're liberated, emancipated from the stresses and anxieties about that which is perceived. That's enlightenment. One's samsara, one's enlightenment. It's just a shift in the mind. And the only way you can perceive of that shift happening in the mind is if you add the ninth consciousness. It's not affected by karma, by action. The new actions you make toward your enlightenment go into the alaya consciousness, and minimize and color all of the other karma within the alaya. But that's because it's not a circle of causation inside the alaya. It's an applied force of enlightenment that modifies the alaya, mollifies it, influences it, so that its tendencies and conditions manifest uniquely, differently. That's what our practice is about doing, and helping others to do the same. Because in helping others to do the same, we innately do this process of mollifying the tendencies and conditions that manifest. And so every cell in our body manifests anew, differently, mollified. I know, calmly, but there was, anyway. I'm getting old. Their conduct, Mahamati, will be in accordance with the effortless exhibition of a great loving heart that ingeniously contrives means of emancipation. Knowing that all beings have a nature of being like a vision or a reflection, I like the moment-to-moment instantiation of energies, and that there is one thing which is not bound by causation, being beyond the distinction of subject and object, and further seeing that there is nothing outside the mind as far as an experience is concerned, and in accordance with a position of unconditionality, they will by degrees pass through the various stages of bodhisattvahood, and will experience the various states of samadhi, and will, by virtue of their resolve, conviction, and understanding that the triple world is of mind itself, and thus understanding, will attain the samadhi mayopama. I'm just going to keep going. The bodhisattvas entering into the state of imagelessness, where they see into the truth of mind only. Keep hammering on that mind only thing. Arriving at the abode of paramitas, and keeping themselves away from the thought of genesis, deed, and discipline, they will attain the samadhi of Vimbopama, which is the compliance with the Tathagata and with the transformations of suchness. After achieving a revulsion in the abode of the Vijnanas, Mahamati, they will gradually realize the Tathagata, which is endowed with the powers, the psychic faculties, self-control, love, compassion, and means, which can enter into all the Buddha lands and into the sanctuaries of the philosophers, and which is beyond the realm of Sito Mano Vijnana. Therefore, Mahamati, these Bodhisattva Mahasattvas who wish, by following the Tathagata to realize it, should exercise themselves in compliance with the truth of mind only, to desist from discriminating and reasoning erroneously on such notions as skandhas, dhatus, ayatanas, thought, causation, deed, discipline, and rising, abiding, and destruction. I think it's becoming very clear that that the dialogue here is less about Buddhahood and how to grapple with our experience of samsara. And that doesn't surprise me, because the Lankavatara, certainly as interpreted by Chan and Zen, is very, very much tied to how to be a human, with this idea that there is an objective reality versus a subjective reality. And I will remind you once again that that's not entirely incorrect, but that the missing component is to realize that to be objective or subjective still requires an id, an I, an ego. Everything is thus as my mind sees it. And as Lotus Sutra practitioners, we understand that the mind is an essential, amazing tool. But Buddhahood is outside the experience of a samsaric mind, albeit the samsaric mind, our tool to invite it, to open it, to see it, to experience liberation, not just from things, but the mind itself, which is the great categorizer and discriminator and identifier. So we're talking on the, again, we're right on the cusp so far. We'll see where we get in the next one. Thank you. If you're getting any insights from this, or if you're just enjoying listening to me talk about the Lankavatara, please don't forget to like, subscribe. Whether you, I know YouTubers, they'll talk about hitting that notification bell. This is all for you and to strengthen your practice and mine, right? That's what we're doing together. And so if you're these days I have alarms on my phone and little reminders everywhere to remind me to take my meds or do this or fix the garage or da-da-da, because one day to the next, things will just fly in and out of my consciousnesses. And if it's helpful, then by all means, click the notification bell and you'll be notified every time I post a new podcast, video podcast. But, whether you do that or not is an individual choice. That's up to you, whatever your needs are. My effort here is to provide as much resource, the bookstore, the mandala store, the threefoldlotus.com site, just resources for you to feed your experience of your practice, gain your own insights, build your own fortress of practice for your attainment every day of the liberation, emancipation of Buddha-ness. That's what all of this is for. So, liking and subscribing helps the YouTube algorithm make this channel more accessible. So that's bodhisattva work. And for those of you patrons, I can't express the amazing work that you're doing to support this Sangha. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. So vital. A little or a lot, consistent or time to time, however we can build up our coffers to get better equipment, to spread our message. Like I added was last year, the audio podcasts, the Buddhahood podcast. That was a new thing, and your donations made that possible, so on and so forth. Take care of your health. I deeply appreciate you guys. You're amazing, and I will see you in the next one. All right? I'll have to make myself a note to remember to stop. Okay. Thank you again. Bye for now.